David Tulis.
I really appreciate the NAACP. I certainly do. Raising questions about Lieutenant General A.P. Stewart, whose bust adorns the front of the very bucolic and I would say even lovely courthouse lawn maintained by county or city employees to look just prim and proper every day. A bit of age showing on the monument, but it is 100 years old or so, and is depicting a man who was a historian and a writer. He was a big artilleryman, by the way, and killed his share of Yankees. And no doubt, though he was an anti-secessionist and an anti-slave proponent, would have killed more Yankees if he could have. He would have killed more if he could have. But then with the end of the war and his academic interest, he was assigned to be the man to build a park to commemorate the Battle of Chickamauga. And that was to find lands and to buy lands that were those on which the fighting took place. And that's why we have today the Chickamauga Battlefield Park. It's a federal park. I don't know if it's exactly federal jurisdiction as to whether the House of the Legislature of Georgia voted to cede the land to the federal government, because I think that in federal jurisdiction is very limited. It's limited to certain activities, and from what I read in I think some legal analysis about how that happens, there has to be a vote by the legislature to create a federal jurisdiction. Well, we have the NAACP to thank for the controversy, and I think it's certainly worth looking at. My analysis is local economy and the free market, and you're going to ask yourself, what does a fight that deals with racist sentiment or racial sentiment, maybe if that the second term there refers to that held by some black people. It's not racist, it's racial, and the sentiment held by white people and others for the monument and even for the South is racist. Of course, so you have one is pejorative, one is neutral. But I would say that the local economy argument sees both sides and has a view to drawing the benefit from the argument of each side, because it's not a neutral ground, but it is perhaps a revisionist ground. Here today on Book Friday, we're going to talk about the book of the week here in the program, the David Tulis Show, and this is a book that you, my listener, should read. It's actually available as a PDF online, I think, from the von Mises Institute at Auburn University. You can download a copy of it. My copy is dogged. It's already fallen in pieces, and it's kind of hard to keep in one piece. But we're gonna read a line out of that book from a noted author whose great work, a great work, is a meager 75 pages, a very, very short volume. And so we're going to start off my Book of the Week program today looking at that. This is David Tulis, and I do thank you for giving me just a couple minutes of your time. The news is, as our news director has given in a reading of the reports today for your benefit, and that is that the state NAACP is kind of backing off of taking part in the brouhaha over General Stewart, over the effort to suddenly take offense over someone whom no one knows anything about. And that is, as TV3, in its very, very good report about this controversy says, is largely unknown. And I think perhaps the writer is Kate Smith. She's a reporter at WRCB TV. She says the man depicted in the statue is largely unknown today. And that is true. So how is it that we now are going to gin up offense against his being there, having worn at the time in the war to prevent Southern independence the gray and not the blue? And the state office, led by Gloria Sweetlove. Sweetlove is a hyphenated name. It's not a compound modifier. It's a hyphenated name. She says, "We have not been given data that shows that the local branch has the capacity or local support to move forward with this effort at this time." It's kind of an odd claim, a kind of distancing of the local effort there. Quinston Coleman is one of the local local people who is a man of color and who, as Yusuf Hakim, the former city councilman, says, this statute is simply wrong. We really can't have it here. It offends people. It reminds them of days of terror. And though former Mayor Ron Littlefield, in a letter to John Wilson at Chattanooga.com, says that he doesn't mind if it were moved, it is really not something that should be the cause of offense. It is a reference to a historical figure whose labors had a great deal to do with shaping some of the geography and shaping some of the use of land in the Chattanooga area. Mr. Littlefield says that it might be an opportunity to learn something about a little-known Confederate general who opposed owning slaves, and says that he makes reference to Dalton Roberts' song about A.P. Stewart. Apparently, the song has a lot to say about this man who was a battlefield general, one of the two highest-ranking Tennesseans in the Army of the South, and that was the other. The other one was Nathan Bedford Forrest, a military genius, a self-taught military genius who did not go to West Point. I don't think he did, but he was a man who had a natural country genius for dealing with threats, whether it was raccoons or barking dogs when he was a boy, or hordes of Yankees out of their own territory, whom he wanted to go back. And he wanted them to go back and to shed as little blood as possible. That was a remarkable thing about Nathan Bedford Forrest, the founder of the Klan. The Klan, of course, became something different in about 1915. The Klan was resurrected by racists. The original Klan was to defend the innocency of property owners and the lives of property owners in the South under the very clear tyranny of social management, social reconstruction, of the Reconstruction program of the Republicans. Remember, Republicans brought us Reconstruction. Republicans brought us public schools in the South to shame the new generations at the work, at reference to the work of their fathers and uncles and brothers in the Great War. The Reconstruction was intended to embarrass the new generations to think, man, why would my dad have fought for the South? I mean, my dad was supporting slaves. That's just awful. But Reconstruction had a counterintuitive effect, an effect not intended, and that was to embitter racial relations in the South. It made them very, very bitter and very ugly, especially with the disenfranchisement of soldiers who refused to take the oath, refused to beg pardon from the good people in Washington. So the story is that the state NAACP, according to the letter from Gloria Sweetlove, is sort of hemming and hawing. We're here to eliminate racial hatred and racial discrimination, she says in her one-page missive, and she says, well, she reaffirms the racialist concern about that monument. We are deeply concerned, she says, about the presence of Confederate statues in public places where persons must go to seek justice. And she thinks that the petition movement is justified, but we realize this effort can be a long process that must be led by the local branch with support of citizens in Chattanooga. And it is on that last point that Gloria Sweetlove has doubts about the effort here. But I would say that I'm glad that the NAACP has brought this up. I'm very glad that it has done that, because it wasn't until yesterday that I had reason to read about Lieutenant General Stewart. By the way, the Homeschool Expo is a week from today, next Friday. It's at Camp Jordan at 9 a.m. It's a whole 2-day expo with dozens and dozens of workshops and more than 70 exhibitors from around the country, the best exhibitors on educational topics, with educational software, books, games, math manipulatives, reading hints, reading tips, college connections, and other services for families. If you are a dad, my listener, if you're a dad and want to, maybe to supplement something that you and your wife are doing at home with your children, or you have a child with a learning problem and you need some help, well, there is a great free market and private sector in the Chattanooga area, and that is the homeschool community. Is it a community or is it just a network? It's probably more of a network than a community, but there are many hundreds of families that homeschool here, or who homeschool here in Chattanooga. You can find out more about this expo at csthea.org. That's csthea.org. You can also go to Nooganomics.com. There are a couple of stories in the past few days about this event. Also, at the Hot News Talk Radio Facebook page, there is more about the event here. Now, I want to mention about this question about General A.P. Stewart, and I think it's good to say for Black people to complain about slavery. I think there's reason to complain about slavery, to say that we were not free in the South, and we have Abraham Lincoln, we have the Emancipation Proclamation, and the victory of Northern armies against the South for our liberation. And yes, the war was a judgment. It was God's judgment against the United States. It was God's judgment against the South. Many Southern generals in the Federal Army took part in the abuse of Mexico, stealing Mexico from its own people in the westward expansion. This kind of nationalism that was a form of national theft, one nation against the other. And so there were reasons, I think, that there was a judgment that deserved to be wrought upon the people of the United States, and that was the war, a very hateful and ugly war. It ended slavery, and I think Mr. Hakeem and Quincy Coleman are making a good point about the evils of slavery itself. Now, but it's not a sin. Okay, slavery is not a sin directly, and I think if we see there is a benefit. All right, this is gonna sound a little strange to you, but just bear with me. This is David Tulis. Okay, this is David Tulis. No one else here is saying this except me. Okay, and I want you to not misunderstand me. Personal slavery is better than mechanical, impersonal, and bureaucratic slavery. Okay, we have slavery today in a big way. We have more people probably enslaved to the state of Tennessee today than were actual slaves in the slavery parts of the state prior to the war. And that would be, of course, the tens of thousands of Black people enslaved by the state because they've committed some crime, right? Someone had a little bit of illicit plant on himself. Someone spoke up to an officer and got arrested, charged, and jailed, and finally imprisoned because he resisted arrest, even though there may not have been an underlying charge for that resisting of arrest, right? We have people like that. We have people who are innocent of any big sins, really innocent of any offense to the public or innocent of any tort, and yet they're in jail. They're in jail for crimes that are not sins, for wrongs that are not inherently evil, but just wrong by prohibition, right? Wrong because someone wrote some words to enforce a law that puts people in prison. There are people in jail in Ray County who are there because they can't afford $100 to get out, or $200. There are people who have bad representation by state employees who are the defense bar, state-run defense bar. They can't get out either, and they're asked to plea bargain. So in a way, we have a kind of slavery today that's worse than the personal kind in the South. And I had yesterday a kind of harsh encounter with a family member who couldn't believe that I was making these statements that in fact slavery in the South was better than slavery today. On precisely the point that the slavery today violates the local economy spirit of neighborliness. The slavery today is impersonal, bureaucratic, and administrative, and we have far more damage to both races, white and Black, today because of this economic and political and legal slavery than we had in the old days when the slavery was chattel slavery. It was personal, where a white landowner who needed labor help would buy a Black man at an auction, okay, or a Black woman or a family. He would buy them at auction. I know that sounds horrifying, but in the end, if you read the slave narratives, they're online. If you read the slave narratives, there was in the South largely amity and amiability between the races. In the South, there was a great deal of amity and respect between the races. There was not the racial animosity that we have now, and that we had in the time of Reconstruction. There, the racist feeling, not just racialist, but racist, where there's hatred of the other race, hatred of any person of the other color because of that color. That was greatly exacerbated by the federal intervention in the economy and the culture of the South. Now, to get back to the thesis, and that's this: if we have a slavery today, a kind of a slavery of all peoples to the state, and the argument I would like to think would be come at some point to the NAACP in the future when members of that organization see more of the larger story. They will understand that their slavery today is worse than it was then. And the difference is one is personal and the other is impersonal. And that is very, very valuable to understand that. And that's my argument as a whole, is that we should think in terms of personal relationships in our economics, right? In our dealing in the marketplace and our buying and selling, we should think in terms of personal relationships and looking out for the benefit of other people more than ourselves. That's done in a personal setting. Of course, the training that we get in the media and in the market and by the internet is that there is no personal connection. Everything you do in commerce, in buying and selling, is about you. It's always about you and about your benefit. And you're trying effectively to rip off the person who's selling the good that you're wanting to obtain. It's all about you. And we're trained in the ideas of national economy. We're trained to be subjects of national government. And I think of the Bakersfield, Texas attack on a black girl not too long ago. We posted the video from the NAACP on the Hot News Talk Radio, the Nooga Radio Facebook page yesterday. Please go there, scroll down a few posts on our very active page, and watch a 4-minute video interviewing this young woman who was brutalized by police. Several officers ganged up on her, threw her to the ground, beat her, let loose a police dog against her, pressed her face, bruised her, scraped her body on the hot tarmac after she had come out of a store and was pausing to get a drink of water from the bottle that she had. They were looking for a man with a mustache who had a machete. There was a report of something like that. And so they threw her down and abused her. Absolutely incredible. That would never have happened to a slave girl in the Old South. It would never have happened. It just would not have happened. And that's because the modern day state views black people in terms of propriety of a different kind than the propriety that white people had in black people in that day. In that day, if you were a black man, you were owned by somebody. You were personally owned by somebody, and you were his person and he was yours. Okay, effectively, you owned each other. And that's what happens when you have a personal relationship in the slave relationship. Now, today, the propriety is different. It's impersonal. And that's why Anthony Byrd, for example, a city council member, can tell me that he's been stopped by driving while black, walking while black, an innumerable number of times. He wasn't sure whether it was 30, 40, or 50 when I asked him that question. He didn't know. It's so common to be treated as an object, as someone who is just a piece of property impersonally by the officer. And the abuse, the killing of black people never happened in the South. The killing in Chicago of that young black man hit 16 times by bullets, walking away from the officers, unarmed, that would never, ever have happened in the Old South. Why? Because there was too much respect for people in the Old South. There was too much Christian religion to prevent that kind of volatile and murderous abuse. By whom? By the impersonal state and its agents. We have stories like that a great deal, where a black man is shot down like a dog by officers, some of them black and some of them white. At that point, it's not really a race question. It's a question of the state's domineering over the people and the people's continuing willingness to accept it. I would not accuse the NAACP of being off point. In my mind, I could say it should be talking about police reform with the coming of the new police chief. It didn't do that work at all, I regret to say. And here now it's taken up this cause of the general. And I'll say, okay, bravo. Go ahead and talk about the general and ignore the other topic. But and I won't make the mistake of many talk show hosts who accuse a group like that of focusing on the wrong thing. Let the NAACP focus on what its members think is important. But I would simply back off and say, generally, we are all like that. We're all making the same mistake, if it is a mistake, that the NAACP is working on, and that is focusing on a minor issue while the fundamental servitude by people to the state operates daily, a daily grind in the courts. Look at Chattanooga.com, at the daily arrest report. Look at the people in there. They're mostly black. they're mostly poor. And many of them are there for charges which have no victim. And the state is incapable of showing how it was victimized at all by what they did. Driving on suspended, driving on revoked, not showing up for a court date, not being able to make the bond. That's why people revoke bond, things like that. Having a weapon without a permit, all kinds of things that are part of the licensing state, which favors people who have money and disfavors people who don't have money to buy the privilege that should be not privileged at all. Carrying a gun should not be a privilege. It is a right to carry. You have a right to carry. Even if you're black, even if you're 25 years old, you have a right to carry. And yet the state has seized that and many other rights of white people and of black people. Blacks and whites should unite and seek freedom. This is David Tulis.
The Tennessee Valley's news, talk, and sports leader. Nooga Radio, AM 1240 and 90.